It's the beginning of the new year! So if you haven't already, now is the perfect time to start your gardening calendar. Now, I've talked about this many times in different things, and it's simply to have a plan. It's always a good idea to have a plan, even if it's a really basic plan. It's a starting point for you to get going further through your gardening season. So for me, the way I start, and this is applicable to whether you are a seasoned gardener or a brand new gardener, the starting point to your plan is to find out what zone you're in. If you don't already know what your gardening zone is, you can simply do a search on the internet. Type in your location, the city that you're in, or if you are rural, the city closest to you, and find out what its zone is. For us, our zone is 10A. Now, the reason why you need to know your zone is because there's different climates, and different climates have different zones. So that's going to change when you're going to start planting certain vegetables and when you need to stop growing certain vegetables. Some vegetables are not tolerant to frosts, so you want to take that in consideration. Also, some vegetables need cold weather, so that's another thing to take in consideration. And this is why knowing what your zone is really going to help you set your schedule for the year. So once I've know my zone, I'm going to go ahead and figure out what plants are going to grow the best each month for me. I know in Florida I have an extended growing season because I really don't have to deal with frost so much. But I have an opposite problem to what most gardeners have, and that's my summers are ridiculously hot and humid. Many plants just simply aren't going to tolerate that nonsense and won't grow. So something that I've learned this year is that my particular scenario, I have a bit of a nematode problem, and that really hurt me last year when I was trying to garden. My entire raised garden bed got infected by root knot nematodes and decimated all the hard work I had put into raising sproutlings to be transferred into my raised garden bed. They were great until I planted them in there, and then they just died. I had really sad, sickly plants that I kept trying to nourish with no results because the root knot nematodes attack the plants at the root. So as you continue growing season to season, you'll know what pests are going to affect your plants, and you'll be able to incorporate that as well into your calendar, into your plan. So now for me, I have marked off a section in the summer where most of the plants aren't going to be growing for me to go ahead and solarize. Solarize is the way that I have utilized to effectively deal with my root knot nematode problem. So I have that built into my plan now to take care of those each year so I don't have to worry about them the rest of my growing season. And I have them taken care of during my weakest growth period, so that way I can benefit for when things are going to be more bountiful for me. Another thing to think about is that certain plants really need some extra oomph, and they need it staggered throughout the year through fertilization or other soil amendments. So if you know what plants you plan on planting, or for example, if you have citrus trees like we do in our backyard, then you want to go ahead and mark that in your calendar as well, so that way you won't forget those critical times of when they can use a little bit of extra nourishment. Another thing that I've included into my plan is when to prune. Now, sometimes this is beneficial on temperature. Normally you want to prune when your plants are going dormant, so that way you're not causing any problems for new growth, and you're creating an environment for when it's time for new growth to appear, they have all their energy put into the right place. But for me here in Florida, pruning is even more critical at the beginning of hurricane season. I want to make sure that my power lines and my roof line are completely clear of any tree branches, so that way I won't have any additional damage if a storm comes through. Another thing to consider when you're creating your plan is that there's some plants that are just going to be fine anytime during the year, but you want to focus on what you really want to produce the best, and then research what companion plants may benefit those plants so you can plant them at the same time and in the same area. For example, there are many plants that will repel insects. So if you're planting something like a tomato and you want to make sure that you can repel the insects that are going to bother the tomato, you may want to incorporate something pungent like marigold, as those are going to repel a lot of those pests that are going to bother your tomato. There are other companion plants that work well with other plants because they share the same nutrient needs. So that way you can make sure that all the work you put into the soil to prepare for that plant is going to be universally appreciated by all the other plants that you plant along with it. Another thing that I've added new to this year's calendar is to test my soil. I tend to constantly replenish my soil, whether it's the ground, the raised garden beds, or the container pots, with compost as I make my own compost, and I make a lot of it. But I still want to go through each season at the end when everything is done and test it just to see if perhaps there is some nutrient deficiency that I'm unaware of. This can be easily done by getting a test kit and mailing it in to wherever that test kit is supported, and they can give you some lab results on your test sample. Finally, another thing you may want to add to your plan is when to mulch. Mulching is really going to save you some time in the long run. It's also going to save some money because mulching helps reduce weed growth, and it also limits evaporation, so you won't have to water as frequently, and all the moisture will stay at ground level where you want it. So those are the things that you need to consider when you're making your plan for your growing season. I hope this has helped you, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Also, if you're a seasoned garden and there's something that I missed in this conversation, please add in the comments below so that way you can help the other viewers out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Plant Life.